Well, where do I start this video? Boy, does this team confuse me. The Carlton Football Club. In the VFL era, the Blues were one of the most successful clubs, and of course have had a long and proud history in the game. Carlton also boasts one of the most loyal fan bases and the second highest amount of members behind Collingwood as they continue to grow year on year. But in more recent times, on the field the Blues haven't done much at all. Before 1990, Carlton had recorded 15 flags, and at the time had the most in the competition. However, when the competition went national, Carlton have only been able to claim one more premiership. That was in 1995. And currently, they have one of the longest premiership droughts in the league. So today we are here to take a deeper look at the Carlton Football Club. What they've done right, what they've done wrong, and everything in between. And guys, make sure to let me know down below where you think Carlton are going to finish at the end of the season. And if you do enjoy this video, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe as it helps out the channel so much. But for now, let's get into the video. So I think the best place to start was when Michael Voss took over as head coach. But I think we do need to recap the journey that he has made before becoming the head coach in 2021. Now, a lot of people may not remember this, but Michael Voss's first coaching job at an AFL club was as an assistant at the West Coast Eagles. However, this didn't last very long at all, as his former club in the Brisbane Lions needed a new head coach. The legendary Lee Matthews decided to step down as the coach of the club at the end of the 2008 season. And after going through a grueling process, it was decided that the former captain in Michael Voss would become the new leading man at the Brisbane Lions. And in his first season, he had a very good start, as the Lions were able to record 13 wins and claim a victory in their first final in the 2009 season before bowing out against the Bulldogs in the semi-final. But from that point on, it was all downhill. His team took a nosedive, only recording 7 wins in 2010 and finishing in the bottom 4. And in the next 3 seasons, Voss's side only recorded 22 wins from 63 games. And in the latter parts of the 2013 campaign, the Brisbane Lions Football Club decided not to renew his contract, and Voss decided to step down as senior coach before the season was up. His time at the Lions only saw him come out with a 40% win rate. However, he was still quite young in his coaching venture. So his next step was to move to SA, where he joined Port Adelaide in the post-season of 2014 as their midfield manager. And he thrived in this role. The Powers midfield across Michael's time at the club would claim many All-Australian selections, and the club's midfield group would be complemented around the league. In 2019, Voss would be promoted to the senior assistant at Port Adelaide, essentially making him Ken Hinkley's right-hand man. And his time as a senior assistant saw the club hit great heights. In 2020, the club fought through many troubles due to the pandemic and were able to claim a minor premiership, and in the next season, he and Ken Hinkley led his team to a second place finish on the ladder. So with Michael playing a big role in the club's success on the field, rivals started to keep a close eye on the former 3-time premiership captain. Teams such as the Gold Coast Suns were being rumoured to potentially snap up the power assistant, but eventually a head coaching job opened up at one of the biggest clubs in the country. That was Carlton. The Blues originally had their sights set on former St Kilda and Fremantle coach in Ross Lyon. However, when that didn't eventuate, Michael Voss became next in line to take the job. And in September of 2021, the Carlton Football Club would announce their new head coach in Michael Voss. Voss's time in the City of Churches brought him a wealth of knowledge under the tutelage of Ken Hinkley, and the previous experience he gained while coaching at Brisbane, it seemed maybe this decision from the Blues could be a masterstroke, and he could be the catalyst to lead this club to break their premiership drought. Now, looking at the squad that Voss inherited from former coach in David Teague, all things considered, the Carlton list looked good on paper. Lots of star factor with the likes of Charlie Curnow, Mackay and Cripps, young talent blooming through with Walsh and De Koning, and some wise old heads to take the Blues to the next step, with names such as Ed Curnow and Doherty. The Blues had a lot of upside, and in the off-season of 2021, the Blues landed some big recruits. George Hewitt was brought over as a free agent from the Sydney Swans, Lewis Young joined from the Western Bulldogs, and most notably, Adam Cerra came from Fremantle. And in the draft, the Blues used their one selection to pick up Jesse Motlop to add to their forward depth with the retirement of Eddie Betts. Now, there were a few other departures at the Blues. Most notably, we saw the loss of Mark Murphy through to retirement, along with Liam Jones, who decided to step away from the game due to being unvaccinated. But of course, he has returned to the game now in the most recent years, joining the Bulldogs. And finally, we did see the departures of Levi Casbolt and Sam Petrevski-Seton, who decided to move clubs. But overall, Voss had a list which hadn't reached its full potential. In his first season as head coach for the Blues, they had a blistering start to their campaign with 8 wins from 10 games and sat 3rd on the ladder. However, as the season went on, the Blues continued to fall down the ladder, and in the final round of the season, they came up against their old rivals in Collingwood. And Carlton choked up a 24-point lead at 3/4 time to go down by 1 point, and in turn would miss the finals. But there was still a lot of optimism around the Blue Baggers, that if they could hit the off-season strong with some decent recruits and have a good start to the next campaign, then maybe they could finally break their finals drought. The big recruit in the off-season was Blake Acres from Fremantle to add to their running capacity between the arcs, and many people predicted that Carlton could finally break their finals drought. And when the season did begin, the Blues started hot. They were undefeated after their first 4 games, and hopes were high on Lygon Street. But their next 10 games brought 9 losses, and this put themselves in the bottom 4, a stark fall from grace. The Michael Voss DNA was still evident, with the team winning the contested game most weeks, and they were able to get the ball inside their forward 50. But their problem was locking the ball inside and building pressure. As soon as the ball went in, it came out just as fast. Their King's Birthday Eve game was where this issue was on full display. They recorded their lowest pressure rating of the year, only laying 33 tackles and lost by 34 points. But strangely, dominated the inside 50 count with 15 more than their opponents. This was a common trend at the Blues, and is still an issue to this day. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, because as most of you know, Carlton made the finals in 2023. From 15th in round 13 to finals at season's end. So, what happened? Well, the prime movers in the guts carried. Alright, well, it wasn't that simple. But Carlton started to bully teams in the clinches and scoring from their stoppage work. They went on a 7-game winning streak on their way to secure a final spot. And during that time, the Blues kicked 269 points from stoppage and dominated at clearance with 88 plus points against their opponents. This proved the scoring profile of this club was heavily influenced by their midfielders. Now, the scoring profile of the Blues, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind for later, but the wealth of knowledge that Michael Voss had as a player and a coach in the art of being a midfielder was rubbing off on his team, and they were primed for finals. After defeating the Swans and the Demons in absolute classics, along with a 5-goal head start against the Brisbane Lions, some thought that they looked like potential grand finalists. However, the Lions were able to wrestle back control midway through the second term and eventually take the lead and didn't look back. Carlton bowed out of the 2023 final series after a 16-point defeat, but they lost no followers. After a gallant second half of the season, from 15th to be a part of the final 4 teams in the comp, it was an amazing effort, and heading into 2024, hopes were high that they could not only get one step closer and make a grand final, but potentially break their long-running premiership drought. And not only did they get off to a good start in 2024, but they were exceptional. After 16 rounds, the Blues found themselves in second position on the ladder with 11 wins and just 4 losses. The Blues' key targets up forward were obliterating opposition defenders for fun. The 1-2 combination of Walsh and Cripps was on display each and every week, and their contested game, along with their clearance work, could not be stopped. But there was one small issue still rearing its head, which was their turnover game. However, it was fine at the time, as their midfielders were the best in the competition, and their key forwards were doing everything in their power to drive this team to glory. But then, injury took the club by storm. Their injury list grew to 17 players deep, and these weren't just no-name players. These were the players who were only a few months ago being seen as some of the best players in the competition. Between round 16 to 22, the club went from 2nd to 9th and were in danger of missing the finals. However, after beating the West Coast Eagles in round 23 and getting a helping hand from Port Adelaide in round 24, the Blues scraped into finals. But in hindsight, they were just making up the numbers. They played Brisbane at the Gabba in their first final and failed to kick a goal for the majority of the first half and eventually going down by 28 points. With the Blues' injuries halting their momentum from a brilliant first 16 rounds of the season and teams starting to work out their game plan, the Carlton mid-season hopes of breaking a premiership drought turned to nothing. The Blues' game plan of relying on their best players to drag them home was stopped by better teams, and their only plan B seemed to be dump kick inside their forward 50 and hope something would happen. And that same game plan is something associated with the club at the moment. So a few moments ago, I did mention the scoring profile of the club and how it's heavily influenced by its midfielders. Even when they were in their period of dominance throughout that 2023 season, it was an anomaly that the score from stoppage was higher than their score from turnover. Throughout the whole campaign, it wasn't too bad, with 26.9% of their scores coming from stoppage and turnover was 18.8%. However, when they hit that rich vein of form, the Blues recorded 31.5% of scores from their stoppage work and 19.6% from turnover. Now, at the time it did work, but the game has evolved a lot since then. The best teams in the league at the moment are dominating on the outside with the speed of ball movement and scoring off of turnover, and Carlton still haven't adapted to that style of football. The Voss playbook is still stuck in the early 2020s of winning the ball at stoppage and use your grunt mids to be the catalyst to help you score. He hasn't evolved with the new style of football and it's simply not working. I know people tend to fixate on the fact that the Blues don't have good small forwards to kick goals, but I also think there's another issue at the club, being their ball users. They haven't been able to find a player who has elite ball skills. Now, I want to quickly mention a few recruits the Blues have missed out on in the past few years, which would have helped them evolve into a new style of game. Dan Houston in the most recent trade period was the big talking point and was on the radar of Carlton for a few weeks. However, the club were hesitant to give up a first round selection, and eventually he left Port Adelaide to go to Collingwood. Now, players like Adam Sard have filled this void for the club in recent seasons, and he can use the ball quite well. But how many times do we see him just dump kick inside their forward 50 and not use composure? Nick Newman has been a player at times with relative success at the club, but with a season-ending injury earlier in the pre-season, they've had to look for other options. I think throughout the pre-season, a player they wanted to evolve into a halfback distributor was Ollie Hollands, but his performances so far have been tracking down the same trajectory as the football club. Now, Tom Papley in 2019 requested a trade to the Blues for family reasons. However, Papley was still contracted at the time until 2023, and the only way the Swans were willing to let go of the small forward was if they could land Joe Danaher. But the deal fell through, and the Swans held on to Papley, who since has stayed long term. Now, the Papley deal was, of course, before Voss's time at the club, but Papley would have definitely helped with the Blues' small forward issues. Instead, the Blues have had to pick up Lockie Fogarty from Geelong at the time and Orazio Fantasia. And in most recent times, to try and fill that void, neither of them have been able to live up to the hype. For a few years, it seemed that small forward role was going to be filled by Matt Owies, who they eventually let go to the West Coast Eagles. But in all seriousness, I understand he did leave because he wasn't satisfied with the offer the Blues were offering him, which leads me to what I believe the biggest issue that the Carlton Football Club face in the coming years, which is their salary cap. Since 2023, the salary caps at AFL clubs have increased from $13.54 million to roughly $7.7 million. And in that 2023 year, we saw a list of the top 100 highest earning players in the AFL. And even though this is a few years old, I think it's a good indicator as to the issues the Blues are facing long term. So out of the top 100 highest earners, the Blues currently hold 9 players on this list. And Cripps has also jumped higher up in the list in terms of highest paid players in recent years. So you would expect that the majority of the players on the Carlton list with higher wages would have increased even more. Now, I think it's up to the eye of the beholder on whether these players are worth being in the top 100 earners in the game. But what is clear is the fact that Carlton have had to trade away a lot of their role players who earn less money in recent years to accommodate for the higher earners. The salary cap at Carlton is so tight right now that they've had to let go of players who play vital roles for them to pay for their stars. We look at players in the Voss era that the Blues have either had to trade away or have been delisted that could have played pivotal roles for the club. Jack Martin, David Cunningham, Caleb Marchbank, Matt Kennedy, Jack Carroll, Sam Durden, Matt Owies, Paddy Dow, Will Setterfield, Lockie O'Brien, Zach Fisher, Oscar McDonald, Liam Stocker, Levi Casbolt. All of them, even though they may not be in their best 23 right now, they would have at least been providing some much needed depth, especially when the club is suffering with injury woes. If you compared every team's best 6 players, I'm sure the Blues would stack up against majority of them. And who knows, maybe they'd be better than the most. However, if you stack up the fringe players at every club, I would say Carlton would have one of the worst teams going around the league. Premierships aren't won by just star players. Yes, star factor plays a role, but if you don't have players who are willing to do the grunt work and play the fundamentals, then you won't be holding up that cup at the end of the season. How does the saying go? You're only as good as your weakest player. And unfortunately, it's no easy fix for the Carlton Footy Club. They have a lot of these top earners at the club on long-term contracts. And this year, they have a lot of big decisions to make on players who are coming out of contract because a lot of them are the few role players they have left, such as George Stewart and Jack Silvani, just to name a few. Now, I failed to mention the biggest player out of contract this year in Tom De Koning. Rumours have been circulating around the ruckman being offered stacks of money to move to St Kilda. And with Carlton's salary cap being so tight, it's going to be hard to see them hold on to players that they need for the now, but also for the future. Now, on the opening few rounds of 2025 season so far, the Blues have been hit by a few big injuries already, including Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow, who have only returned in recent weeks, and of course the unfortunate season-ending ACL injury to top draft prospect in Jagger Smith, who had a lot of high hopes of coming in and having instant impact. But injury isn't the only issue at the club. The fact that this team lost to Richmond is unforgivable. Having to make this man change his name and the rest of the fan base having to suffer with embarrassment at the hands of a loss that no one saw coming. And the opening 4 rounds of the season haven't shown much promise at all. Now, I'm genuinely curious to know what Carlton fans think at the moment, so let me know down below how you feel about your club and how they're going to fare for the rest of the season. And also let me know down below about the dilemma that the club is facing with their salary cap. But this club is one of the biggest teams in the competition, have some of the best players in the game, and as of round 4, sits 16th on the ladder. They look no closer to breaking their premiership drought, and at the moment, the fans are screaming out for something to go their way. This once great club seemingly see no light at the end of the tunnel.